At sunrise, Mara Redbird found a wedding ring nailed to her cabin door. A strip of white cloth hung beneath it, moving in the dry Arizona wind. 5 words had been burned into the cloth. "Wear it Sunday or die." Mara did not scream. She pulled the nail from the wood, dropped the ring into the dirt, and crushed it beneath her boot. Then she saw the hoof prints. Someone had ridden around her cabin during the night. The tracks passed her windows, circled the barn, and stopped beside the grave where her husband had rested for nearly 2 years. Mara walked to the grave with her rifle held against her shoulder. The earth had been opened, only a few inches, but it was enough to show her what the threat meant. Amos Vale did not merely want her land. He wanted her to believe he could reach even the dead. Mara knelt beside the grave and pressed the loose soil back into place. "I will burn this cabin before I give it to him," she whispered. A saddle bell rang somewhere beyond the ridge. Mara rose quickly and aimed her rifle toward the trail. A lone cowboy appeared through the morning dust. He rode a tired black horse and wore a faded brown coat. His beard was dark, his hat was torn along one side, and a long rifle rested across his saddle. Mara's breath stopped when she saw the silver marks carved into its stock. The rifle had belonged to her husband. "Get off the horse," she ordered. The cowboy raised both hands. "My name is Caleb Shaw." "I did not ask your name." Caleb looked at the grave behind her, then at the broken wedding ring near the door. "No," he said quietly, "I suppose you didn't. Get down." He dismounted slowly and placed the rifle in the dirt. Mara moved closer but kept her weapon aimed at his chest. Gabriel Redbird had carried that rifle on the night he died. The men who returned his body claimed they had never found it. Yet now a stranger had brought it back. "Where did you get this?" "A gambler tried to sell it in Cinder Creek 3 nights ago." "Where is he?" "Dead." Mara tightened her grip. Caleb saw the question in her eyes. "I didn't kill him. Someone put a bullet in his back before he could tell me where he found it." "Why bring it here?" Caleb looked toward the distant hills. "Because 2 men followed me out of Cinder Creek, and because one of them works for Amos Vale." The name made Mara's face harden. Vale owned the largest cattle ranch in the county. He also controlled the bank, the freight wagons, and half the men wearing badges between Cinder Creek and Tucson. Mara's land was small, but a clear spring ran beneath it. Vale needed that water for the 3,000 cattle he planned to drive south before winter. He had offered to buy the land. When Mara refused, he offered marriage. When she refused again, cattle began disappearing. Fences were cut. Windows were broken during the night. Now he had sent a ring. "You expect me to believe you came all this way to return a rifle?" Mara asked. "No." Caleb's answer surprised her. He pointed toward her well. "I came because Vale's men purchased 2 cans of lamp oil yesterday. One of those cans is lying behind your water trough." Mara turned her head for only a second. Caleb did not reach for a weapon. She moved toward the trough and found an empty metal can hidden beneath a torn feed sack. The water carried a thin rainbow color across its surface. Her stomach turned. She had filled her cooking pot from that well less than an hour earlier. Caleb walked toward the pot, lifted it carefully, and poured the water into the dirt. Mara raised the rifle again. "I did not tell you to touch anything." "No, ma'am." He placed the pot down and stepped back. "You should leave," she said. "You have no clean water. I have survived worse. I believe you." There was no pity in his voice. That troubled Mara more than pity would have. Caleb took 2 empty water barrels from beside the barn and loaded them onto a wooden handcart. He did not ask her permission. He also did not ask her to trust him. "The canyon spring is 4 miles east," he said. "You can follow with your rifle pointed at my back if that makes you feel safer." Mara almost told him to disappear. Then she looked toward the poisoned well. For 4 miles, Caleb pulled the heavy cart, while Mara walked behind him on horseback. The sun climbed higher, burning the last cool air from the desert. Sweat darkened his shirt, but he never asked her to help. At the spring, he washed both barrels twice before filling them. Mara watched his hands. They were rough and scarred. A thin white line crossed his right wrist, where a rope had once cut deep into the skin. "You knew my husband," she said. Caleb continued filling the barrel. "Once." "When?" "Copper Pass. 5 years ago." "Gabriel never spoke of you." "He had no reason to." Caleb secured the barrel and faced her. "He found me hanging from a tree." Mara said nothing. "A group of cattle thieves believed I had stolen from them. Gabriel cut me down before the rope finished its work. He gave me water, returned my gun, and rode away without asking for my name." Mara looked at the scar around his wrist again. "That still does not explain why you came." Caleb lowered his eyes toward Gabriel's rifle. "No, it doesn't." When they returned to the cabin, 2 riders were waiting. Both wore Amos Vale's red cattle brand on their jackets. The older rider, Wade Mercer, held a folded document in one hand. A smile showed beneath his pale mustache. "Sunday is almost here, Mara. That is not my name to you." Mercer's smile disappeared. He tossed the document at her feet. "Marry Mr. Vale, and you keep the cabin. Refuse, and the county will declare this land abandoned Apache property. My husband paid for this land. Then show us the deed." Mara's silence gave him his answer. The deed had vanished the same night Gabriel was killed. Mercer glanced at Caleb. "You her new hired hand?" Caleb looked at Mara before replying. "She can answer for herself." Mara stepped between them. "Tell Vale I will meet him at my husband's grave before I meet him at an altar." Mercer leaned from his saddle. "By Sunday night, those may be the same place." The riders turned and disappeared into the dust. Caleb remained beside the water barrels until darkness covered the valley. He repaired nothing and offered no promise. He simply stood watch while Mara carried clean water into the cabin. When she came outside again, she held a knife at her side. "Men do not cross deserts for dead friends," she said, "not without wanting something." Caleb faced her. Mara forced out the question that years of threats had placed inside her. "Do you only want my body like the others?" Caleb's eyes did not move below her face. "No," he said. "I want nothing from you that fear has to give." Mara could not speak. Caleb then lifted Gabriel's rifle, pressed a hidden catch beneath the stock, and removed a folded paper sealed with dried blood. "Your husband did not lose the deed," he said. "He hid it." Mara reached for the paper, but Caleb did not release it. "And he wasn't killed in a land dispute," Caleb said. "He was murdered because of the name written on the back." Mara unfolded the paper beneath the light of the cabin lamp. The front held the missing deed to her land. Gabriel's name stood beneath the seal of a federal surveyor. The borders were clearly marked, including the spring Amos Vale wanted so badly. On the back, Gabriel had written a message in his own hand. "If Vale comes for the water, find Caleb Shaw." He saw what happened at Black Mesa. "Trust no badge in Cinder Creek." Mara read the words twice. Then she looked at Caleb. "What happened at Black Mesa?" Caleb closed the rifle stock and rested the weapon against the wall. 7 years ago, a federal surveyor named Owen Hart came through this valley. He discovered that Vale had moved his ranch markers 6 miles beyond his legal border. That would place my spring inside Vale's land. That was his plan. Caleb told her that Hart had prepared a new map for the federal land office. Before he could deliver it, Vale and 4 hired men stopped his wagon near Black Mesa. Caleb had been working as Hart's guide. He watched Vale shoot the surveyor and steal the map. 2 Apache riders who came upon the wagon were also killed. Caleb escaped after Gabriel found him wounded inside a dry riverbed. "Gabriel saved you at Copper Pass," Mara said. "He saved me twice. Vale's men were still hunting me." "Then why did you wait 2 years to come here?" Caleb did not defend himself. "Because Vale blamed me for Hart's murder. I spent 5 years inside Yuma prison." Mara studied the scar around his wrist. It had not come from one rope. There were smaller marks beside it, left by iron chains. "I was released last month," he continued. "I heard about Gabriel while traveling through Cinder Creek. Then I saw his rifle in that gambler's hands." Mara looked at her husband's writing again. Her anger did not disappear, but its direction changed. "Can the deed stop Vale? If we file it with the federal land agent at Fort Grant before Vale receives an abandoned land order. When will that happen?" "Monday morning." It was Friday night. Fort Grant stood nearly 70 miles away. "We leave before sunrise," Mara said. Caleb looked toward Gabriel's disturbed grave. Vale may not wait that long. Neither of them slept. Caleb remained outside near the barn while Mara packed food, water, ammunition, and the few things she could carry. She wrapped the deed in oilcloth and tied it beneath her dress. Before midnight, the horses became restless. Caleb heard leather move beyond the fence. He reached the cabin just as a burning bottle flew through the darkness and broke against the barn wall. Flames climbed the dry boards. "Mara, get down!" A rifle shot tore through the cabin window. The lamp shattered, throwing the room into darkness. Mara crawled behind the heavy table and reached for Gabriel's old revolver. Another shot struck the door. Outside, 3 riders moved around the cabin. One fired toward the windows, while the others spread burning oil along the fence. They were not there to frighten Mara. They meant to leave nothing standing. Caleb fired from beside the porch and forced one rider behind the barn. Mara moved to the rear window, broke the remaining glass with her gun, and aimed at a shadow near the water trough. The man raised another burning bottle. Mara shot it from his hand. Fire burst across the dirt, frightening his horse. The animal threw him and ran into the darkness. "Two left," Caleb called. The barn roof caught fire. Inside, Mara's mare kicked against the stall. Mara rushed toward the door. Caleb caught her arm. "They're waiting for you. My horse is inside." He released her at once. "I'll cover the yard." Mara ran low through the smoke. Caleb fired at the ridge while she reached the barn and pulled open the stall. Her mare charged out, followed by Caleb's black horse. A gun flashed near the fence. Caleb turned toward Mara just as the shot came. The bullet struck his upper arm and spun him against the porch post. Mara fired back. The rider dropped his weapon, climbed onto his horse, and fled with the third man. Caleb pressed one hand against his wound. "We have to move. The cabin will burn. If we stay, we burn with it." Mara stood between the flames and Gabriel's grave. Every board in that cabin had carried a piece of the life they built together. His coat still hung beside the bed. His coffee cup still sat on the shelf. She wanted to run inside and save everything. Then more hoofbeats sounded beyond the ridge. Caleb pulled himself onto his horse with one arm. Mara mounted her mare and followed him into the southern wash as smoke covered the stars behind them. They rode until the horses began to weaken. Caleb nearly fell from his saddle before Mara guided him toward an empty mining shack hidden between 2 cliffs. The roof leaned to one side, but its stone walls offered protection from the wind. Inside, Mara cut open Caleb's sleeve. The bullet had passed through the flesh without breaking the bone. Blood covered his arm and shirt. "This will hurt," she said. Caleb looked away. "Do what you need to do." Mara cleaned the wound and pressed a folded cloth against it. When Caleb's hand shook, she wrapped his fingers around a piece of leather. He did not complain. "You could have let me run into the yard," she said. "And watched you get shot? You hardly know me." Caleb looked at her then. "I know you stood over your husband's opened grave without begging the men who did it. I know you walked 4 miles behind a stranger because you would rather face danger than drink poisoned water. That tells me enough." Mara tied the bandage and moved away. Caleb took Gabriel's rifle from beside him and handed it to her. This belongs with you now." Mara accepted it. For the first time, she did not check whether his hand was near his gun. At dawn, they rode toward Cinder Creek. Caleb needed a doctor, and the horses could not cover 70 miles without rest. The noon stagecoach could carry Mara to Fort Grant before nightfall. They entered town through the eastern road. People stopped speaking when they saw Mara. Some stared at the burned edge of her dress. Others recognized Gabriel's rifle across her saddle. Caleb had barely reached the doctor's office when Sheriff Nathan Pike stepped onto the street with 4 deputies. "Caleb Shaw," Pike called. "Get your hands where I can see them." Caleb slowly raised his uninjured hand. Mara moved her horse between them. "He needs a doctor. He needs a cell." Pike opened a folded warrant. "You are under arrest for the murder of Gabriel Redbird." Mara stared at the sheriff. "That is a lie. Caleb was in Yuma prison." Pike's eyes remained on Caleb. "He escaped 3 months before Gabriel died." Mara turned toward the cowboy. Caleb said nothing. The deputies took his gun and pulled him from the saddle. He did not resist, even when his wounded arm struck the ground. Then Amos Vale walked from the hotel across the street. He wore a clean black suit and carried a silver-headed cane. His eyes moved from Caleb to Mara with quiet satisfaction. Sheriff Pike opened an evidence box and removed a blood-darkened knife. Caleb Shaw's name was carved into its handle. "This was found beside your husband's body," Pike told Mara. "Ask your new friend where he was the night Gabriel died." Mara looked at Caleb through the gathering crowd. Caleb met her eyes. "I was there," he said. Mara did not raise Gabriel's rifle. 6 guns were already aimed at her, and Caleb's wounded arm hung useless beside him. One wrong move would leave them both dead in the street. Caleb saw her hand tightening around the rifle. "Not here," he said. Sheriff Pike pushed him toward the jail. Amos Vale remained near the hotel, watching Mara as though the land already belonged to him. "You have until Sunday," Vale said. "Become my wife, and I may convince the sheriff to keep Shaw alive for a fair trial. You place that knife beside Gabriel's body." Vale smiled. Grief can make a woman imagine many things. Mara stepped toward him. The deputies raised their guns again. Vale opened his coat and showed her the same wedding ring she had crushed outside her cabin. "This one is cleaner," he said. "I will keep it ready." Mara wanted to strike him, but Caleb needed her alive. She turned away and entered the doctor's office. Dr. Samuel Reed was an older man with weak eyes and hands that no longer remained steady. He had treated Gabriel's body 2 years earlier. He also knew Mara had never believed the story written in the county report. "Tell me how my husband died," she said. Dr. Reed closed the curtains. "You already know." "I need you to say it." The doctor looked toward the jail across the street. "Gabriel was shot twice, once in the back and once beneath his left shoulder." "What about the knife?" "It was placed beside him after he died." Mara's jaw tightened. "Why did you sign a report saying Caleb killed him with that knife?" "Because Sheriff Pike stood beside my wife while I wrote it." The doctor opened a locked cabinet and removed a small leather book. Inside were his private notes from the night Gabriel's body arrived. The wounds were described in plain detail. The time of death was written beneath them. Dr. Reed tore out the page and handed it to Mara. "My wife died last winter," he said. "Pike has nothing left to threaten me with." Mara folded the page and placed it beside the deed beneath her dress. "Can you get me inside the jail?" Dr. Reed nodded. "Pike will allow me to treat Caleb's arm. He may let you carry my bag." The jail smelled of sweat, dust, and old wood. Caleb sat inside the last cell with one wrist chained to the wall. Blood had soaked through the cloth around his upper arm. Sheriff Pike watched as Dr. Reed opened the cell. "The woman stays outside," Pike ordered. "She knows how to hold a bandage," the doctor replied, "unless you want the prisoner dead before Vale decides what to do with him." Pike looked at Mara for a long moment before unlocking the door. "You have 5 minutes." Inside the cell, Mara knelt beside Caleb while Dr. Reed cleaned the wound. Caleb did not look at her. "Why did you lie about escaping Yuma?" she asked. "I told you I was imprisoned. I did not say I remained there every day." "That is not an answer." Caleb finally faced her. "Gabriel sent me a letter 2 years ago. He had found Hart's original deed and learned Pike helped Vale kill the surveyor." "How did Gabriel find you?" "A prison chaplain carried letters between Yuma and the Apache families near San Carlos. Gabriel remembered my name." Caleb explained that he had escaped through the prison workshop and traveled north for 11 days. He reached Mara's cabin after dark. Pike and Wade Mercer were already there. Caleb hid among the rocks and watched Pike demand the deed. Gabriel refused to surrender it. Pike shot him. "Why didn't you stop them?" Mara asked. "There were 6 men, and I had no gun." "You could have tried." "I did." Caleb's voice remained low, but something changed in his eyes. "After they rode away, I went to Gabriel. He was still alive. He told me the deed was hidden inside his rifle." Mara glanced toward Sheriff Pike. "What happened to the rifle?" "I took it and tried to reach you. Before I found you, Pike's deputies caught me at Red Canyon. They returned me to Yuma and kept the rifle." "Why were you never charged with Gabriel's murder?" "Vale did not want a trial. A trial would give me a place to speak. He wanted me forgotten inside prison." Dr. Reed began wrapping a clean bandage around Caleb's arm. Mara looked at the knife inside the sheriff's evidence box. "Pike says your name is carved into the handle." "It is my knife, but I had not touched it in 5 years. Pike took it when he arrested me for Hart's murder." Mara understood. The knife had been inside Pike's office long before Gabriel died. If the old evidence record still existed, it could prove the sheriff had planted the weapon. Dr. Reed finished the bandage. Pike struck the cell bars with his keys. Time. As Mara stood, Caleb caught her hand. His touch was weak, but she did not pull away. "Take the deed and leave town," he said. "Ride for Fort Grant alone. I will not leave you to hang. You owe me nothing." "This is not about debt." Caleb looked at her hand inside his. Mara slowly withdrew it and walked from the cell. Outside, she waited until Pike left the jail to meet Vale. Dr. Reed kept the deputy busy by asking for clean water. Mara slipped behind Pike's desk and opened the lower cabinet. Old arrest books filled the shelves. She found the book from 7 years earlier and searched for Caleb's name. There it was. Caleb Shaw, charged with the murder of Owen Hart. 1 revolver, 1 saddle, 1 black-handled knife. The knife had been received and signed by Nathan Pike. Mara tore out the page. A shadow crossed the desk. Deputy Lewis Carter stood in the doorway. His hand rested on his gun. Mara slowly placed the book down. Carter looked at the torn page, then toward Sheriff Pike through the window. "My brother rode with Owen Hart," he said quietly. "Pike told me Apache raiders killed everyone at Black Mesa. He lied." "I know that now." Carter moved away from the doorway. "You were never here," he said, "but you need to leave before dark." Mara returned to Dr. Reed's office with 2 pieces of proof and the original deed. Together, they could destroy Pike's story and Vale's land claim. She went directly to the telegraph station. The operator tried to send a message to the federal marshal at Fort Grant. The wire was dead. Someone had cut it outside town. Then the church bell began to ring. People rushed into the street. Riders carrying torches gathered outside the jail. Wade Mercer stood at the front of the crowd with a rope across his saddle. Sheriff Pike dragged Caleb from the cell. "There will be no trial," Pike announced. The prisoner tried to escape. Caleb could barely stand. His hands were tied, and blood had begun to spread across his fresh bandage. The crowd followed as Pike pulled him toward an old cottonwood tree. Amos Vale stood beneath its branches, holding the wedding ring between his fingers. Mara stepped into the center of the street, with Gabriel's rifle across her back. Vale raised one hand, stopping Pike before he placed the rope around Caleb's neck. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. Mara looked at Caleb. He shook his head. She then faced Amos Vale. "Take out the ring," she said. "I'll marry you." Amos Vale closed his fingers around the wedding ring. "Put Shaw back in the jail," he ordered. Wade Mercer lowered the rope, but Caleb continued staring at Mara. Vale stepped closer to her. "Sunday morning, the church. You will sign the land over to me before the vows. Caleb walks free before I sign anything. You are not in a position to make demands." Mara looked toward the people gathered beneath the cottonwood tree. "Then hang him. Let everyone watch you kill the only witness who can prove what happened at Black Mesa." Whispers moved through the crowd. Vale's smile faded. "Shaw will remain alive until the ceremony ends," he said. "What happens after that depends on you." Caleb was dragged back to the jail. Vale offered Mara a room inside the hotel, but she refused. She stayed in Dr. Reed's office, where she spread the deed and the 2 torn record pages across a table. Deputy Carter entered through the rear door after midnight. "The northern telegraph wire has also been cut," he said. "Vale has men watching every road." Dr. Reed pointed toward a narrow trail on an old map. "The mining path through Crow Canyon reaches Fort Grant by tomorrow afternoon." Carter folded the deed and the evidence pages inside his coat. "If I reach the federal marshal, he can stop the wedding and arrest Pike." Mara placed her hand over the deed. It was the last thing Gabriel had left to protect their home. Sending it into the darkness with a man she barely knew could cost her everything. Then she remembered Caleb handing her Gabriel's rifle. Trust could not be demanded, but sometimes it had to be given before it could be earned. Mara released the paper. "Ride hard," she said. Carter left through the alley and disappeared into the night. An hour later, Mara crossed the street with Dr. Reed's medical bag. Sheriff Pike was asleep in his office, but the younger night guard allowed the doctor inside. Caleb stood when Mara entered his cell. "You should already be on the road to Fort Grant," he said. "I sent Carter with the proof." "Carter works for Pike." "Not anymore." Dr. Reed distracted the guard while Mara moved closer to the bars. "I told Vale I would marry him to keep you alive," she said. "I did not promise I would finish the ceremony." Caleb gripped the iron bars. "Vale will kill you the moment he gets that land. He will have to get it first." Mara removed a thin piece of metal from her hair and passed it through the bars. Caleb looked at the lockpick in his palm. "Where did you learn this?" Gabriel believed every locked door should fear a patient woman. For the first time since his arrest, Caleb almost smiled. Then his face became serious again. "If the marshal does not come, you leave me behind." "No. Mara, listen to me. I have spent 2 years listening to men tell me what I must surrender to stay alive. I am not asking you to surrender. You are asking me to carry another grave." Caleb's hand moved through the bars and rested against her cheek. He touched her carefully, leaving her enough room to step away. She remained still. "I came because I owed Gabriel my life," he said. "But that is not why I stayed." Mara raised her eyes to his. Caleb's voice became softer. "I stayed because when everyone tried to make you smaller, you stood taller. I stayed because I could not ride away and spend the rest of my life wondering if you survived." Mara covered his hand with hers. "I forgot what it felt like to be seen without being measured." Caleb leaned closer to the bars. Mara kissed him. It was brief and gentle, yet it broke through 2 years of empty mornings and silent nights. When she stepped back, Caleb kept his forehead against the iron. "Do not die before Sunday," she whispered. "I'll do my best to disappoint them." At sunrise, Vale sent a white wedding dress to Dr. Reed's office. Mara threw it into the stove. She wore a dark blue Apache dress that had belonged to her mother. Small silver pieces decorated the shoulders, and a red woven belt circled her waist. She braided her hair and placed Gabriel's small turquoise stone around her neck. Beneath the belt, she hid a short revolver. Sunday morning arrived without Deputy Carter. No federal marshal rode into town. The church filled before the sun cleared the rooftops. Ranchers, traders, workers, and families crowded the wooden benches. Some came to witness a wedding. Others came because they knew blood might be spilled before the vows ended. Vale stood near the altar in a black suit. Sheriff Pike brought Caleb through a side door. His hands were chained, and 2 deputies remained behind him. Mara stopped when she saw the fresh bruise across Caleb's face. Vale held out his hand. She walked past it. Reverend James Cole opened his Bible, but his fingers shook. "Before we begin," Vale announced, "Mrs. Redbird will sign an agreement, joining her land with mine." He placed the document on a table beside the altar. Mara read it carefully. The agreement did more than transfer the spring. It gave Vale ownership of her cabin, livestock, water rights, and every piece of land Gabriel had purchased. "Release Caleb," she said. Vale nodded toward Pike. The sheriff removed the chain from Caleb's wrists, but the deputies kept their guns against his back. "Now sign," Vale ordered. Mara picked up the pen. The church doors remained closed. Carter had failed. She lowered the pen toward the page, then wrote a single line across the agreement. Amos Vale murdered Gabriel Redbird for this land. The people nearest the table gasped. Vale snatched the paper away. Mara turned toward the crowded benches. Dr. Reed examined Gabriel's body. His report was changed by Sheriff Pike. Caleb's knife was taken into Pike's office 5 years before Gabriel died. The arrest record proves it. Pike drew his gun. "She is lying." Dr. Reed stood from the front bench. "Every word is true." Wade Mercer entered through the rear doors. Blood stained one sleeve of his jacket. In his hand, he carried Deputy Carter's silver badge. "No marshal is coming," Mercer said. Vale held the badge where Mara could see it. "Your proof burned beside his body in Crow Canyon." Dr. Reed moved toward the door, but Pike struck him down with the side of his gun. Caleb lunged at the deputy behind him. The hidden metal pick had opened his chains. He seized the man's wrist and forced the gun toward the ceiling. A shot tore through the church roof. People screamed and rushed for the doors. Mara pulled the revolver from beneath her belt. She fired at Pike, knocking the gun from his hand. Caleb drove the second deputy into a bench and ran toward her. Vale caught Mara from behind and pressed a small pistol beneath her jaw. "Drop it, Shaw." Caleb stopped. Mercer aimed his rifle at Caleb's chest. Mara drove her heel into Vale's knee, but he held her tightly. Mercer fired. The bullet struck Caleb below the shoulder and threw him against the altar. "Caleb!" Vale dragged Mara through the side door, while smoke and dust filled the church. Mercer followed, firing at anyone who tried to stop them. They forced Mara onto a horse and tied her hands to the saddle horn. As Vale climbed onto his own horse, he looked toward the burning edge of town. "The deed may be gone," Mara said, "but the land will never belong to you." Vale turned his horse toward Black Mesa. "I no longer need the deed," he replied. "By sunset, I will destroy the spring and bury you in the same place where your husband learned the truth." By the time Caleb forced himself to stand, Mara had been gone for 12 minutes. Blood covered his shirt, but the bullet had passed through without striking his heart. Dr. Reed pressed cloth against the wound, while the people inside the church surrounded Sheriff Pike. The sheriff reached for another gun. Deputy Lewis Carter appeared in the doorway and aimed first. Carter's face was cut, and one side of his coat had been torn away. He could barely stand, but he was alive. Wade Mercer had taken his badge and left him inside Crow Canyon. What Mercer did not know was that Carter had hidden the real deed and evidence pages beneath his saddle lining. The papers Mercer burned were blank. Behind Carter stood Federal Marshal Henry Barrett and 4 mounted soldiers from Fort Grant. "Arrest Pike," Carter said. "I'll take the marshal to Black Mesa." Caleb picked up a revolver from the floor. Dr. Reed blocked his way. "Ride with that wound, and you may bleed to death. Then make the bandage tighter." Minutes later, Caleb rode from Cinder Creek with Carter, Marshal Barrett, and the soldiers behind him. Mara was already being pulled deep into Black Mesa. Vale and Mercer took her to an abandoned survey camp hidden between tall walls of dark stone. Old wagon wheels lay half-buried in the sand. Broken tools and rusted chains rested near the entrance of a collapsed mine. Several sticks of dynamite had been placed along a crack above the underground spring. One blast would send thousands of pounds of rock into the water channel. Mara's spring would disappear beneath the mountain. Vale dragged her from the horse. "This is where Owen Hart found the true border," he said. "The spring was never part of my ranch. Neither were the eastern fields I have used for 7 years. And Gabriel discovered what you did. He found Hart's survey box inside that mine." Val looked toward a narrow opening in the rocks. "Your husband should have taken my money. You never offered him money." "No, I offered him the chance to live." Mara's hands remained tied behind her, but Mercer had failed to search her boots. A small skinning blade rested inside the leather near her ankle. She lowered herself beside a rock as though exhaustion had taken her strength. Vale continued speaking because he believed she was no longer dangerous. "Pike shot Gabriel," he said. Mercer placed Shaw's knife beside the body. Everyone saw an Apache man with a knife near him and a wanted criminal's name on the handle. It was an easy story for this town to believe. Mercer laughed. Mara bent her knee and pulled the hidden blade free. She began cutting the rope behind her back. "What happens after you destroy the spring?" she asked. "Your land becomes worthless. Without you or the deed, the county will sell it to me before winter. And Caleb?" Mercer looked toward the road. "He is probably dead inside the church." The rope separated. Mara kept her hands behind her. Vale removed a match from his coat and walked toward the dynamite fuse. "Stand her near the mine," he told Mercer. "When the blast is over, there should be nothing left for the marshal to find." Mercer reached for Mara. She turned and drove the blade into his shoulder. He shouted and stumbled backward. Mara ran toward the horses as Vale struck the match. He lit the fuse and drew his pistol. A gunshot came from the ridge. The weapon flew from Vale's hand. Caleb rode down the slope, one arm pressed against his wounded chest, and a revolver held in the other. Mercer grabbed his rifle. Mara pulled Vale's gun from the sand and fired before Mercer could aim. The bullet struck the rifle stock and knocked it aside. Caleb left his saddle and hit Mercer with his shoulder. Both men fell against the rocks. The dynamite fuse continued burning. Mara ran toward it. Vale caught her around the waist and threw her into the dirt. He reached for the fallen pistol, but Mara kicked it beyond his fingers. He struck her across the face. Mara rolled away, took a handful of sand, and threw it into his eyes. Val cursed and covered his face. She reached the fuse. The flame was less than 3 feet from the first stick of dynamite. Mara used the small blade and cut through the cord. The burning end fell harmlessly into the sand. Behind her, Mercer forced Caleb against the mine wall. Caleb's wounded arm could no longer hold him back. Mercer pulled a second knife from his belt. Before he could use it, Deputy Carter fired from the ridge. The knife dropped from Mercer's hand. Marshal Barrett and the soldiers surrounded the camp. "Do not move," the marshal ordered. Mercer raised his hands. Vale wiped the sand from his eyes and ran toward the mine entrance. Mara saw another short fuse disappearing between the rocks. "There is more dynamite inside," she shouted. Caleb broke away from Mercer and followed Vale. Mara ran after them. Inside the mine, Vale reached a wooden crate beside a deep shaft. He held a burning match over the second fuse. At his feet rested a brass survey box. Hart's federal seal was still visible on its lid. Caleb aimed his revolver. Dropped the match. Vale looked at the shaft, then at Mara. "If I lose this land, no one will have it." He lowered the flame. Mara threw her knife. The blade struck Vale's hand. The match fell and went dark. Vale charged toward Caleb, but the old boards beneath his boots broke. He caught the edge of the shaft with both hands. Caleb moved forward to help him. Vale pulled a hidden pistol from his coat and aimed it at Caleb's face. Mara fired first. The bullet struck Vale's shoulder. His hand slipped from the broken board, and he fell into the dark shaft below. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Caleb lowered his gun and picked up the brass box. Inside were Hart's original map, his survey notes, and a list of payments Amos Vale had made to Sheriff Pike. The truth Gabriel died protecting had survived. Outside the mine, Marshal Barrett arrested Mercer. The soldiers removed the remaining dynamite while Carter secured the proof. Caleb took 3 steps toward Mara before his legs failed. She caught him and lowered him carefully into the sand. His eyes began to close. "Do not leave me with another grave," she said. Caleb managed a weak smile. "That sounds like an order." "It is." He survived the ride back to Cinder Creek. The federal court recognized Mara's deed and restored every stolen border marked on Hart's map. Pike and Mercer were sent to prison. Families who had lost land to Vale received their property back. When spring arrived, Mara rebuilt her cabin beside the clear water. Caleb remained in Cinder Creek while his wounds healed. He visited only when Mara invited him. He repaired the barn, planted cottonwood trees, and never touched Gabriel's belongings without asking. One evening, they stood beside Gabriel's grave as the setting sun turned the hills red. Caleb opened his hand. A simple silver ring rested in his palm. "I will not nail this to your door," he said. "I will not ask for your land, and I will never claim your life as payment." Mara looked at the ring, then at him. "What do you want?" "A place beside you, if you choose to give it." Mara took the ring from his palm. "The first man who offered me a ring brought a threat." Caleb waited without moving. She slipped the silver band onto her finger. "You brought me a choice." Then Mara took his hand and led him toward the warm light glowing through the cabin window.